Hello and welcome to The World This Morning, where the deepest shifts in global geopolitics are brought to light, one headline at a time. As world powers shed their masks and ambitions are laid bare. In today's broadcast, a series of turning points continues to shake the global stage, from the Middle East to Eastern Europe, from negotiation rooms to the far reaches of space. Broadcasting from Riyadh, the U.S. President lays out a bold, historic vision, a new Middle East, prosperous, pragmatic, and rising from the chaos of the Islamic world. Presented with a ceasefire ultimatum from the U.S. and Europe, the Russian president doesn't just reject it, he lashes out, calling the West a bunch of fools. As tensions teeter on the brink of a new escalation, the Kremlin stands accused of using diplomacy as a smokescreen for further attacks. Beneath the polished slogan of a no-limits partnership, conflicting goals between Beijing and Moscow are quietly eroding the very core of the Eurasian alliance. We bring you expert insights and we want to hear your views too. Tensions are rising by the hour at the India-Pakistan border. With both sides armed with nuclear weapons, the world is now watching a regional dispute spiral towards global alarm. A classified file buried for over half a century in the Reagan Presidential Library has resurfaced, revealing a never-before-disclosed meeting between U.S. intelligence and a life form from another world. You're watching The World This Morning. U.S. President Donald Trump is making waves once again in Saudi Arabia, unveiling a sweeping and ambitious vision to transform the Middle East into a land of peace and prosperity. And perhaps we should all wish him well with that dream. One of his first victories, restoring close ties with Saudi Arabia, a key regional ally after former President Joe Biden nearly drove that relationship to collapse.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, gave Trump a warm welcome, with both sides signing over a dozen agreements to boost cooperation. Saudi Arabia also pledged to invest $600 billion in the U.S., though Trump reminded them to raise that number to $1 trillion. The president then laid out a roadmap toward a bright future for the Middle East. A future of peace and prosperity, where commerce replaces chaos. After decades of conflict, we finally have the chance to seize the future that previous generations could only dream of, he enthusiastically declared, and Trump had already proven that such a vision was possible, at least in theory, during his first term with the Abraham Accords, surprise peace deals between Israel and several Arab nations. On Tuesday, Trump called on Saudi Arabia to join those accords, saying, "You will honor me. You'll do it when you're ready." A peace agreement between Riyadh and Jerusalem could play a pivotal role in ending the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If the Arab world moves forward, the dream of Israel's destruction becomes a hopeless cause. Trump rightly blamed much of the region's chaos on Iran, but also stated that he was ready to end past conflicts and establish new partnerships with Tehran for a better and more stable world. Should Tehran reject this olive branch, Washington will have no choice but to apply maximum pressure and reduce Iran's oil exports to zero. Regardless, Trump vowed that Iran will never possess nuclear weapons. Bravo! Even if fulfilling that pledge may require military action, which everyone understands is on the table. The president also plans to normalize relations with Syria's new administration. He will lift sanctions on the country to give them a chance at greatness, and is scheduled to meet with Syria's interim president, Ahmad al-Sharaa, on Wednesday. even though the man was once an Al-Qaeda leader. All of this paints a magnificent and grand vision, what Trump calls the golden age of the Middle East. This is precisely the hope the region so desperately needs, not just to hear, but to embrace and act upon. Of course, vision and reality are often very different, especially in the Middle East. But there is hope that the president and key regional players can turn Trump's vision into a new reality.
A high-profile Western delegation arrived in Kyiv on Saturday, led by French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Their mission: to press for a 30-day ceasefire and urge President Vladimir Putin to join peace talks in Turkey in this Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has pledged to wait for Putin in Istanbul. And U.S. President Donald Trump says he might fly in as well if the Russian leader agrees to show up. But Putin's response? A biting remark aimed at the West's threat of new sanctions. He said, "You could think they wouldn't do this or that since it clearly hurts them. But nope, they still do it, morons."
In a recent statement regarding the new sanctions threat, Putin mocked, saying, "I thought they wouldn't do this or that, because clearly it hurts them too. But no, they did it anyway. What a bunch of morons." So far, there are no signs Putin is willing to engage in talks, despite Trump's earlier call for a direct meeting between Putin and Zelensky last week. Trump wrote, "At the very least, they could determine whether a deal is even possible. If not, U.S. and European leaders will know exactly where things stand and can act accordingly." I'm starting to doubt Ukraine can strike a deal with Mr. Putin, who is still busy celebrating World War II Victory Day, a victory that would never have happened or even come close without America. Hold the meeting now. Hope for an end to the Russia-Ukraine war surged last week when both sides appeared open to peace negotiations. However, while Zelensky expressed readiness for direct talks with Putin, the Russian leader's right-hand man, Dmitry Medvedev, dismissed Western plans, telling them to shove their peace proposals wherever they want. President Zelensky said, "I'm ready to meet. I met this man back in December 2019. I know exactly what I want to say. The truth is on our side. I think we must take the first step for the people. And the whole world is backing this, first and foremost for the Ukrainian people. Everyone wants the war to end. We want to reach an agreement on the beginning of the end of this war. At the very least, a beginning." The most recent ceasefire was a unilateral suspension declared by Putin. It coincided with the 80th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, but Ukraine accused Russian forces of continuously violating even their own 3-day ceasefire. Russia denied this and claimed Ukraine was the one violating the ceasefire 14,000 times. Since then, Russia launched UAV attacks, with 108 drones reportedly fired from 6 different directions, according to Ukraine's Air Force. Earlier in March, the U.S. proposed a limited 30-day ceasefire, a proposal accepted by Ukraine, but the Kremlin delayed, waiting for more favorable conditions.
Meanwhile, the Institute for the Study of War has warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin is actively seeking to manipulate the Ukraine ceasefire negotiations in an effort to undermine unity between Ukraine, the United States, and European allies.
This follows a May 10th phone call between Ukrainian President Zelensky, President Trump, and several NATO leaders, during which they agreed to support an unconditional 30-day ceasefire starting May 12th. Zelensky subsequently proposed a direct meeting with Putin in Turkey on May 15th, emphasizing Ukraine's willingness to negotiate, but insisting that a full, unconditional ceasefire is a prerequisite for any dialogue. Putin rejected the ceasefire proposal, stating that any ceasefire deal could only be discussed through direct negotiations, and that such talks must begin without preconditions. Rather than agreeing to the joint proposal from the US, Ukraine, and Europe, Putin called for a return to the Istanbul Protocols of 2022, a framework previously rejected by Ukraine for being biased in Russia's favor.
According to ISW, this is part of a broader Kremlin information campaign reflected in recent remarks from both Putin and Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, aimed at penetrating the Western information space, influencing public opinion and weakening the resolve of Ukraine and its allies. The think tank warns that Russia's messaging strategy is designed not only to apply diplomatic pressure, but also to mask the fact that Moscow has made no significant military gains in over 2 years of war. Despite this, Russian officials continue to push for peace on the condition of Ukraine's complete capitulation, a stance that leaves no room for compromise.
ESW noted that recent comments from Putin and Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov are part of Moscow's broader strategy to infiltrate Western information space, sway public opinion, and weaken the resolve of Ukraine and its allies. ESW assessed that this media campaign aims to mask the fact that Moscow has failed to achieve any significant battlefield gains over the past 2 years. Meanwhile, Russian officials continue to demand that peace be conditioned on Ukraine's total capitulation, a stance with no room for compromise. Nevertheless, both President Zelensky and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed to hold peace talks in Turkey on May 15th. Zelensky confirmed he would personally travel to meet with Putin and stated that Ukraine is still awaiting Russia's response to the ceasefire proposal jointly put forth by the US, Ukraine, and Europe. According to ISW, Putin is using negotiations as a tool to achieve strategic goals while continuing military operations. The Institute warned that this fight-while-talking approach is aimed at securing battlefield advantages without abandoning imperial ambitions. Deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, Pavlo Palisa, said Russia's current core objective remains the capture of all administrative territories of Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, as well as the creation of a security buffer zone in Kharkiv and Sumy to protect Russian territory from Ukrainian counterattacks. ISW also warned that Russia may soon launch new offensives in Zaporizhia and river crossing operations in Kherson, where Russian forces still hold some territory. Amid ongoing conflict, several European leaders, including French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, emphasized that peace talks cannot be held under drone strikes, suggesting that armed aggression must cease before any negotiations.
As the world watches with growing concern the tightening embrace between Xi Jinping's China and Vladimir Putin's Russia, one expert is sounding the alarm on what he calls the inevitable unraveling of this authoritarian axis. Mao Yu, director of the China Center at the Hudson Institute, argues that despite their outward display of unity, the Beijing-Moscow partnership is fragile, plagued by historical resentment, strategic contradictions, and a deep power imbalance that cannot be sustained.
The so-called no-limits partnership is a mirage, a marriage of convenience disguised as brotherhood. Strip away the joint statements, military parades, and loud diplomacy, and what remains is an empty shell, held together not by trust, but mutual exploitation. Central Asia is the strategic battleground in this tug of war. Russia still sees the region as its imperial backyard, a legacy of the Tsarist and Soviet eras. However, China has overtaken Russia economically, embedding itself through its Belt and Road Initiative, with roads, railways, and generous loans. Meanwhile, the Kremlin deploys troops and pushes the Collective Security Treaty Organization. China builds factories and buys loyalty. Russia demands political obedience, China seeks economic dependence. These goals are incompatible, and their conflict of ambition is very real. The post-Soviet republics understand this, and so do Kremlin generals. This competition is not theoretical. It is unfolding in reality. Moscow wants to be the overlord. Beijing wants to be indispensable. Both cannot exist simultaneously. Russia's northern frontier, its last fortress, is also being quietly encroached.
Moscow insists the Arctic is sacred territory, a frozen pillar of national sovereignty. But China, despite lacking any Arctic border, boldly claims to be a near-Arctic state, seeking access to the region's energy and shipping lanes. This isn't opportunism, it's strategy. Beijing has written it into white papers and naval doctrine. Russian nationalists see it clearly, a step-by-step encroachment disguised by a scientific cooperation. As Beijing melts the ice, it also melting Moscow's illusion of control.
Joint military drills and naval exercises are nothing more than carefully staged performances. Beneath them lies deep mistrust. Russia refuses to sell its most advanced weapons to China. On the rare occasions it does, due to financial pressure, it tries to offset the risk by selling similar systems to China's regional rivals, especially Vietnam and India. In return, China steals and reverse engineers what it can, ironically, often through Ukraine, which inherited massive Soviet-designed arsenals after independence. Since the 1990s, Ukraine has irresponsibly sold many of these systems to the People's Liberation Army, PLA. These deals included China's first aircraft carrier, advanced engines for upgrading the PLA's H-6 strategic bombers, Y-series military transport aircraft, large hovercraft landing ships, and missile and fighter systems. The PLA copied these technologies without credit or compensation, a poorly kept secret that has long enraged Russian defense officials. This is not military integration, it is calculated theft. Russia cannot afford to alienate its biggest customer. China knows it and continues pushing boundaries.
Historically, Russia and China have fought more than they have stood together. The 1969 Yusuri River border clashes were not an outlier. They were a warning. The Chinese Communist Party has long blamed the Soviet Union for betraying true communism, while Beijing maintains ideological control over the PLA. Putin has abandoned Leninist doctrine, even outsourcing war to mercenaries like Wagner. To Beijing, that is not just a mistake, it's a suicide.
Moreover, mutual distrust between these two civilizations stretches back centuries. Treaties were signed with guns at heads, empires were carved with blades at throats. Today, Xi and Putin may toast in public, but privately they carry the burdens of history. Nationalism runs deep in both capitals. Hardline Chinese nationalists view the Treaty of Aigun, 1858, as a national humiliation. It ceded vast lands to Russia. Russian elites fear a slow invasion by Chinese immigrants and capital into Siberia and the Russian Far East. Miles Yu concludes, "This is not friendship. It's a staring contest between two empires, temporarily aligned by their shared hostility toward the West. Russia's dependence on China is deepening, from trade and technology to even basic banking services. Putin once dreamed of a Russia as a Eurasian counterbalance to the West. Now, he faces the risk of becoming China's vassal. For a man obsessed with sovereignty, that is the ultimate humiliation." Yu asserts that while Beijing and Moscow share a common enemy in the West, they do not share a common vision of victory. Russia seeks to restore its imperial borders. China wants to rewrite the global order. Russia acts from insecurity. China acts from ambition. Putin uses brute force. Xi uses economic coercion, political infiltration, and technological hegemony. These are not complementary strategies. They are divergent paths toward incompatible destinations. Sooner or later, they will collide. What binds Beijing and Moscow is not solidarity, but a shared hatred of Western liberalism, U.S. power, and accountable democracy. But hatred is not a strategy, it is a symptom. The deep truth is, Xi and Putin do not trust each other. And in geopolitics, as in life, lack of trust is a death sentence. When the decisive moment comes, and it will, the dragon and the bear will
Turning now to South Asia, where tensions between India and Pakistan have exploded into a new and alarming dimension. While a fragile ceasefire still technically holds, cyberspace between the two nuclear-armed rivals is ablaze, with claims that a Pakistani nuclear facility may have suffered critical damage following an Indian airstrike. What truly sent shockwaves through the region? The sudden deployment of a US B-350 AMS, a specialized aircraft designed for radiological emergencies.
Pakistan maintains 12 strategic air bases under 3 regional commands, North, Central, and South. Additionally, radar stations and forward support posts play vital roles in logistics, maintenance, and command operations. During India's airstrikes, several of these bases were reportedly targeted. According to sources on May 12th, India is believed to have launched attacks on key Pakistani airbases, including Rafiki Air Base in Shorkot, Norkon in Rawalpindi, Murid in Chakwal, and other locations such as Rahim Yar Khan, Sukur, and Chunian. Radar facilities in Pasrur and Sialkot were also reportedly struck. Updated satellite images have revealed a chilling truth. Malir cantonment in Karachi was indeed attacked. These are no longer isolated warning shots, but part of a large-scale campaign. The Indian Air Force, IAF, allegedly targeted vital military sites in most major Pakistani cities. Rumors intensified after satellite images confirmed severe damage to Musharraf Air Base in Sargodha, suspected to house underground nuclear storage in the Karana Hills. According to the Eurasian Times, reports suggest that a U.S. Department of Energy nuclear emergency support aircraft, B-350 AMS, has landed in Pakistan. Flight tracking data from Flight Radar 24 confirmed the aircraft's presence, raising speculation of a possible radiation leak following a strike on a suspected nuclear facility.
Indian defense experts and netizens have floated the theory that Pakistan may have invited U.S. intervention to help broker a ceasefire, especially after a strike allegedly hit one of its most sensitive nuclear sites. The fear of additional airstrikes on strategic nuclear infrastructure has pushed Islamabad into a state of high alert. Some international reports now suggest Pakistan's nuclear command center itself may be the next target, a move that could launch the entire region into a full-blown nuclear crisis.
The New York Times quoted a former U.S. official familiar with Pakistan's nuclear program as saying, "Pakistan's greatest fear is the command and control of its nuclear arsenal being attacked and rendered inoperable." The missile strike on Norkon might be a warning that India is fully capable of doing just that. New Delhi, however, swiftly and firmly denied all allegations, stating that it had not carried out any strikes on Pakistan's nuclear infrastructure.
And back to this morning's top defense stories. A shocking new revelation from the People's Liberation Army is sending tremors through the global strategic community. As the U.S. ramps up its military support for the Philippines, new research from China's PLA rocket force suggests Beijing may be developing space-launched hypersonic missiles weapons capable of hitting any target on Earth within just 30 minutes.
Published in the Chinese aerospace journal Acta Aeronautica et Astronautica Sinica, the research describes re-entry glider vehicles that can maneuver quickly and change direction mid-flight at speeds of Mach 15 to 20, about 21,000 kilometers per hour from the upper atmosphere. Special variants can even be launched from satellites, significantly reducing early warning and response times for adversaries, while increasing penetration against defense systems. The research lends credibility to earlier U.S. intelligence warnings, once doubted by some analysts, including a Financial Times report from 2021 citing a Chinese test of an orbital hypersonic weapon. At the time, critics dismissed it as science fiction, but U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth recently confirmed that such weapons could wipe out 10 aircraft carriers within the first 20 minutes of conflict. He warned that China is building a military force designed specifically to defeat the United States. However, the PLA study also acknowledges serious limitations. Strong infrared signals make the weapon easier to detect. Payload is limited, and the weapon is vulnerable to interference during the terminal flight phase. As advanced defense systems like THAAD, Patriot 3, SM-6, early warning radar, and infrared satellites continue to evolve, China's hypersonic missile survivability faces growing challenges. The researchers emphasize the urgent need to develop next-generation hypersonic technology to maintain strategic deterrence. They recommend integrating artificial intelligence, stealth design, decoy tactics, and swarm strikes to breach increasingly dense missile defenses. They also propose using low radar and low infrared trajectories to delay detection, reduce tracking accuracy, and increase the chance of breaching defenses. The study concludes that China's hypersonic weapons must also enhance resistance to electronic jamming, high-powered lasers, and even nuclear blasts, if they are to preserve a strategic advantage in future warfare environments. China's public admission of its plans to launch space-based hypersonic weapons has triggered widespread fears of a new arms race. This time, beyond Earth's atmosphere, where war may know no limits.
A bombshell revelation from the West is making global headlines. Newly unearthed government documents appear to confirm what for decades was dismissed as conspiracy. The United States may have successfully established contact with extraterrestrial beings over 60 years ago. Over 50 pages of CIA documents, which the FBI has long dismissed as forgeries, claim that a top-secret U.S. program made direct contact with a UFO as early as 1959. Launched in 1954, Project Sigma reportedly used binary computer code to transmit radio signals into deep space in a bid to reach intelligent life beyond Earth. Just 5 years later, a U.S. Air Force officer is said to have met with extraterrestrial beings who had received the messages.
Project Sigma, launched in 1954, used binary computer code transmitted via radio waves into space to connect with extraterrestrial life. Just 5 years after the first contact, a U.S. Air Force officer reportedly met with 2 alien beings who had received those transmissions. The documents say that on April 25, 1964, an intelligence officer met the 2 extraterrestrials at a prearranged location in the New Mexico desert, the same region as the infamous Roswell crash. The meeting lasted about 3 hours, during which the officer and the aliens exchanged basic information about their species. The file also details how a secret government group known as Majestic 12, MJ-12, used immense authority to keep UFO information classified, even from the military and the White House. The 12-member group was reportedly formed under a secret executive order by President Harry Truman in 1947. For over 2 decades, the group allegedly oversaw communication with aliens, UFO research, spacecraft recovery, and reverse engineering of advanced technology. CIA documents claim that it took 5 years for MJ-12 to make successful contact with alien life, using binary radio code to establish what they called primitive interstellar communication. Binary code is the lowest level language understood by computers, using sequences of zeros and ones to represent data and commands. Scientists today still use similar methods in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The top-secret meeting was not found in the CIA's declassified records, but was discovered when the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library opened in 1991 and quietly released the documents to the public. MJ-12's existence was first exposed in 1984 when a whistleblower allegedly sent reports to UFO researchers.
Interestingly, none of this was found in the official declassified CIA archives, but instead surfaced in 1991 when the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library quietly made the documents available to the public.
The FBI later labeled the documents as fabrications, stating that the group, its members, and its operations were fictional. However, in 1988, U.S. intelligence noted inconsistencies and formatting errors in the supposed brief sent to President Eisenhower, suggesting the documents were likely fake. Still, many details in the MJ-12 files matched materials found in the Reagan Library, including the names of the 12 members. As for why this shocking 1964 meeting and all related alien contact remained secret for 60 years, another declassified CIA memo may offer the answer. According to the Daily Mail, a 1953 government memo found in the CIA's declassified archives instructed that public discussion of UFOs should cease, due to fear that the government could lose control over public opinion.
UFOs are real, they're physical, they're a national security concern.
And that's all for now on The World This Morning. Thank you for watching and goodbye.